After 18 years, we finally have a new film in the Omen franchise. This time it's a prequel to the original film. So let's talk about it. To give you a little bit of a point of reference, I only watched The Omen for the very first time just a few years back, and prior to that, it had been one of those movies I've been meaning to watch forever because I'm a gigantic Richard Donner fan, and The Omen is the movie they got Richard Donner the job directing Superman the movie. So it's been on my radar forever, and I was wondering, would it hold up? And no, I thought it was just a great horror film that has stood the test of time. It's still creepy, unsettling, works on levels that I wasn't expecting, and built into it kind of has these weighty questions of what would it take for you to believe that your child is the Antichrist? What would it take for you to come to the decision that maybe you need to kill your own child? That's powerful stuff and horrifying stuff. Therefore, it has worked and stood the test of time. But I'm not a particularly big fan of non-horror films, so this wasn't one that I was particularly excited about. And then the trailers didn't do anything particularly interesting, so I just went into this one very hesitant, not particularly excited. Was the movie able to win me over, or was it another blah, unnecessary prequel? Well, let's get started with the good. And right off the bat, I'll say that this movie actually surprised me and was better than I was expecting. This is very much the Rogue One of the Omen franchise, and to that point, it's able to tap into the paranoia, kind of those deep primal questions about what would it take for you to believe something horrific, and what would you do if you started to believe something horrific. And for that reason, it actually works as a new piece in the Omen franchise that fleshes out the lore. And sometimes I'll say that a bad prequel answers questions that no one was asking with answers that aren't particularly satisfying. And I'll say this one does what a good prequel does, which is it answers questions that make the lore more interesting. It explains things in a way that feel earned and they feel right. They feel historically relevant. And in the case of this movie, it plays into kind of what has taken place over the last 100 or so years in terms of shifts in culture, how much people go to church for belief systems, as well as how much people trust the establishment. It takes those ideas that have very much shaped culture over the last 70 years and builds it into the lore of the Omen, and giving motivation to the actions of the unseen villains and unseen organizations in the Omen franchise. And I assume a question a lot of people will be asking about this film is it just another movie crapping on organized religion, in particular the Catholic Church? This is a question that many people asked me about Immaculate, and I would say that neither one of these movies are really even in any way attacking organized religion, the Catholic faith. The villains in these stories are extremists with radical ideas. In particular, in this film, it makes a clear distinction between people that are following the true faith versus people that have gone down this very dark path and what's actually motivating them. And there's certainly a debate to be had as to whether people of faith, in particular of the Christian faith, should be entertained by stories that go into such dark directions and do Antichrist fan fiction. And at the same time, I think there's a sense in which these stories, the basis of them is that the Bible is true, and it affirms the basis of faith in a different sense, in its own way. So when it comes to the horrifying aspects of this film, one of the things that frustrated me about Immaculate is that the horror and the scary parts were all just jump scares. That You look one way, turn back, something pops up and it makes a loud noise. Someone looks out a window, bird smashes into it. Surprise! Play a loud noise. A lot of jump scares in that movie. There's a couple jump scares in this movie. One of them felt pretty cheap. One of them seemed pretty interesting. But more of the horror here is of the looming sense of lack of control and the dread that comes with realizations of corruption and evil and what it might mean for you. And it does a great job of having very unsettling images. I honestly couldn't believe how graphic a couple of the sequences in this movie were. Apparently, this film struggled to get an R rating. It was originally NC-17. That does not surprise me at all. Without wanting to go into too much detail, there's multiple births in this film, and both of them do really graphic things that I couldn't believe that they showed. And in one of them, I was looking away, and in the other one, I looked just enough to be like, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe that you showed that image, and now it's stuck in my head. And when you're trying to make a horror film, you want to find horrifying images that get stuck in people's heads that you're like, I wish I hadn't seen that. It's part of your job, and when you make one with this premise, you kind of got to do a little bit of that. Along those same lines, in the original Omen, there's allusions to where Damien came from, and they dig up some graves, and some things are implied, and, well, not implied, they're overtly stated. And I always was curious, like, if they made this movie now, you wouldn't go that literal with that, would you? And this movie kind of answers that question, and it doesn't just double, it triples down on some of those more horrifying aspects of the origin of this franchise and everything kind of going on. It really leans into it and plays it out in just horrifying ways. Once again, the horrifying nature isn't because it startled you with a jump scare. It comes from like these realizations that are just grotesque and horrifying with their implications, and it keeps going further and further. There's more and more of a sense of betrayal, of a just like ick factor with everything. And so truly horrifying ideas, images that I couldn't believe that they put in a movie, and a lore that I felt actually complemented the original film pretty nicely. And all of it kind of like shot really well. Like just even kind of the framing of shots when they do slow-mo. The way that even tries to capture some of these horrifying images without being too graphic, but being very graphic in another sense. It's handled really nicely. So I went into this one very skeptical, and the movie itself, it won me over. From there, let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And here, there are just some things I wanted to talk about that didn't fit into the good or the bad. First one, a question that a lot of people ask with movies like this. They ask, can I watch this movie first, or do I need to watch The Omen before I watch this film? Now, I think this movie works entirely well on its own merits and explains things. You could watch this movie and then watch the original Omen as a sequel to it, and that would flow properly and it would make sense. At the same time, there's elements of this film that could spoil elements of that film. So the original Omen is a horror classic. For that reason, you should watch it if you like horror movies, especially if you like horror movies like this. And that, I think, is the pure experience that deserves to be preserved. My recommendation would be to watch The Omen first and then go back and watch this film. Today's video is brought to you by Raycon. It's that time of the year where I'm trying to work out more. I gotta mow my lawn every weekend, and I'm doing a lot of travel. And everything is better with Raycon everyday earbuds. Raycon offers amazing quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands. Don't just take my word for it. There are tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. Raycon's optimized gel tips are designed to fit comfortably in your ears to actually stay there, whether you're going for a long jog or mowing the lawn. A couple weeks back, I was at South by Southwest, and I'd have to wait in lines hours every single day. I just slipped my Raycons in, listened to music or an audiobook, and I didn't even notice they were there. And with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, I don't have to worry about whether they're up for the task. They have 3 customizable sound profiles, so whether I'm listening to music or an audiobook, it sounds perfect. They have a noise isolation mode as well as an awareness mode, depending on if I want to cancel out the world around me or if I need to be able to hear what my kids are up to. Go to buyraycon.com/Sean Chandler today to get 20% off your Raycon order plus free shipping. That's right, you'll get 20% off and free shipping at buyraycon.com/Sean Chandler. buyraycon.com/Sean Chandler. Being that Immaculate came out just a few weeks back, it's weird how similar these two films are. I don't know if there's some actual reason for that, if someone read something, but there's a few too many awkward similarities. There starts being like really specific, exact kind of plot points or like side characters that are essentially the same. It's weird that these two movies came out just a few weeks apart. There's ways in which it feels like the flip side of the same coin. I know, it's crazy how sometimes Hollywood does this where two of the same movie come out in a very small window of time. Make of that what you will. Let's move on to the bad. And the first thing that comes to mind here is that when it's not leaning into the paranoia, the thriller, the conspiracy side of things, it could be a little bit dry for me. In particular, when it leans into the nun-heavy aspect of it, that's just not my kind of thing. And the sort of imagery, environments, just don't by default interest me all that much. The movie itself is kind of built around several different mysteries, conspiracies, and kind of the biggest mystery at the center of it feels like the marketing gave us the answer to it. Like the write-up, the plot of the movie gives away the answer to this one mystery. And so it spends a bunch of time like giving you red herrings or pointing you into these other directions. And the whole time you're thinking, either you better have a really good twist or like, why did you structure this way? It feels like we all know the answer to this or have some sort of idea where this is headed. And there's a little bit of a twist, but by the time you get there, it just felt like, yeah, I figured that out, and not in the way that made me feel smart, more in the sense of like, you structured this really, really weird. And without being able to say too much, the movie ends on a note where it seems like they're setting up a franchise. I'm not sure exactly what that means in this context, where this is a prequel to a movie that exists that already is a franchise. So I don't know how that fits in with the established canon, where they're going with some of this stuff. And maybe it was just to end the note on not as unbelievably bleak of a note as it could have ended on. I don't really know what to make of some of the final things that happen. And finally, there's not as many of the coincidental deaths in this one as you would expect. The movie sets up at the beginning that you have kind of these accidents happen that take people out that are working against the cause. And there are other things in the movie, but not very many. Which, that's one of the things the franchise is known for, these freak accident deaths. And this movie sets that expectation in its opening. Very clearly sets that expectation, and then doesn't follow through on it. It even says to a character that you should be afraid of this, like it's coming, that we're in danger because of this. And that's not really how it plays out. In the last month, we've gotten two different movies with a very similar preference. For me, I thought the first Omen was significantly better as a film overall. A big part of it that was its connections to the Omen lore that just adds this element of like paranoia. It adds this kind of motivation to this grander scheme. And I thought it was smart in some of the ways that it tied into the original Omen. There's a few odd choices and there's some strange structuring, some mysteries that don't really pay off. But overall, this is a solid addition to the Omen franchise. Overall, it's a B on the entertainment scale, a 7 out of 10, and it's worth seeing if you're a fan of the original Omen. You probably don't need to rush out to go see it on the biggest screen possible, but if you like the Omen, do check it out eventually. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know what you thought about it. Come back in a few days for my ranking of the entire franchise, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.